Matthew squinted at the sunlight pouring through the kitchen window as he trudged in, still shaking off the remnants of sleep. The low hum of conversation between Evelyn and Margaret filled the air, punctuated by the occasional clink of a coffee cup. "Good morning, Matt," Evelyn greeted, her voice light as she turned from the counter, holding a steaming cup of coffee in each hand. "Morning," he mumbled, his voice rough. He leaned in to kiss her cheek. She offered it willingly, but there was a fleeting stiffness, a momentary flicker that was easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. But Matthew was. Margaret, seated at the kitchen island, raised her cup in a mock toast. "Look at this domestic bliss," she teased. "You've got to keep her here, Matt. Evelyn's the glue that holds this house together." Matthew forced a smile, shuffling toward the counter to grab his coffee. "Sure, Mom," he replied, his tone neutral. He didn't have the energy for Margaret's morning commentary. As he turned to leave, cradling his mug, the soft murmur of voices caught his ear. "You really think he'll ever figure it out?" Margaret's voice was low, tinged with amusement. "You've done a great job covering it up, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." Matthew froze mid-step. The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Covering up what? He stayed rooted, his ears straining for more, but the room fell silent. "Something wrong, darling?" Evelyn's voice broke the quiet. Matthew turned, catching their quick, shared glance before Evelyn smiled at him, her face a picture of innocence. "No," he said after a beat. "Just thinking." He forced a small smile and headed into the living room, his mind racing. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Matthew couldn't shake the unease that had settled in his chest. The words replayed in his mind over and over. "You've done a great job covering it up." What were they talking about? By the time dinner rolled around, he was on edge, his gaze flicking between Evelyn and Margaret as they talked casually at the table. Every laugh, every shared glance felt like a dagger twisting in his gut. "So, Matt," Margaret began, breaking him out of his thoughts. "Liam's stopping by tomorrow. He said he'd help with the garage shelves. You've been putting that off, haven't you?" "Yeah, I've been busy," Matthew said, his tone sharper than he intended. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Everything okay?" "I'm fine," he said quickly, stabbing at his food. The tension didn't go unnoticed. Margaret exchanged a look with Evelyn, but neither said anything. That night, as they lay in bed, Matthew stared at the ceiling while Evelyn scrolled on her phone. "Did my mom say anything weird this morning?" he asked casually, trying to keep his tone light. Evelyn glanced at him, her face unreadable. "Weird? No, not really." "Why?" "Just wondering," he said, turning his head to gauge her reaction. She shrugged. "You know how your mom is. She talks about everything and nothing. It's probably just one of her usual comments." Matthew nodded slowly, but didn't respond. "Why?" Evelyn pressed. "What's on your mind?" "Nothing," he lied. "Just thought I heard something strange, that's all." Evelyn smiled, leaning over to kiss him. "You overthink sometimes, Matt. Get some sleep." As she turned off her phone and curled up beside him, Matthew remained awake, his mind churning. The next morning, Matthew decided to keep his ears open. He left for work, but returned home during his lunch break, parking down the street to avoid detection. As he approached the house, he could hear voices drifting through the open kitchen window. "You've got to be careful, Evelyn," Margaret said. "Men like Matt can be unpredictable if they ever catch on." "I know," Evelyn replied, her voice tight. "But I've handled it this long, haven't I?" Matthew's blood ran cold. He pressed himself against the side of the house, straining to hear more. "You've done well, sweetheart. Just don't get sloppy," Margaret said. "I won't," Evelyn assured her. Matthew's chest tightened. He walked away quietly, his mind racing. Over the next week, Matthew's paranoia grew. He began noticing small things he had overlooked before. Evelyn's phone was always angled away from him when she texted. Margaret and Evelyn shared too many private conversations. And then there was Liam, his stepbrother, always around, always lingering. Liam's presence suddenly felt suffocating. Was it just his imagination, or was there something more to it? One evening, Matthew decided to test the waters. As they sat in the living room, he casually brought up an old memory. "Remember when Liam moved in with us for a bit after college?" he asked, glancing at Evelyn. She stiffened slightly, but quickly recovered. Of course, she said, her tone breezy. That was ages ago. He was around a lot back then, Matthew said, watching her closely. Still is actually. Evelyn forced a laugh. Well, he's family. Why wouldn't he be? Matthew nodded slowly, but didn't press further. That night, as Evelyn slept, Matthew unlocked her phone. She rarely left it unattended, but tonight she had fallen asleep with it on the nightstand. His heart pounded as he scrolled through her messages. Most of them seemed innocuous, conversations with friends, reminders for the kids' activities, but when he opened a chat with Liam, his stomach dropped. The messages were vague, but the tone was unmistakable. Phrases like, "We need to be more careful," and "he's been acting suspicious lately," leapt out at him. Matthew sat in the dark, the glow of the screen illuminating his face. What the hell is going on? It began as a whisper in his mind, an itch he couldn't scratch. Matthew brushed it off at first, dismissing his unease as paranoia. But the doubts lingered, growing louder with each passing day. Every glance exchanged between his wife, Evelyn, and his mother, Margaret, seemed loaded with secrets. "Pass the salt, Evelyn," Margaret said one evening during dinner. Evelyn handed it over with a small smile, and their eyes met briefly. The moment was fleeting, but Matthew noticed the way they seemed to share something unspoken. "How's Liam doing?" Margaret asked, breaking the silence. Matthew stiffened at the mention of his stepbrother. "He's fine, I guess," he said flatly. "He's been so helpful around here," Margaret added, looking at Evelyn. "He was over just last week fixing the patio door, wasn't he, dear?" Evelyn nodded. "Yeah, he's great with stuff like that." Matthew's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Why's Liam always here anyway?" he asked, his voice sharper than he intended. Evelyn gave him a puzzled look. "He's family, Matt. You've never had a problem with it before." "I'm just saying," Matthew replied, forcing himself to sound casual. "Seems like he spends more time here than his own place." Margaret laughed lightly. "Oh, don't be ridiculous. Liam's just helping out. You know how he is, always happy to lend a hand." Matthew said nothing, but the unease gnawed at him. The next day, Matthew sat alone in the living room, scrolling through photos on his phone. It was something he rarely did, but a wave of nostalgia had hit him. As he flipped through pictures of Emma and Jacob, a thought struck him like a bolt of lightning. Their features were familiar, yet not his. Emma's dark brown eyes, Jacob's olive-toned skin. They didn't resemble him, but they did resemble someone else. Liam. The realization made his chest tighten. He shook his head, trying to dismiss the thought. It was absurd. Evelyn would never, but the idea had taken root. It wasn't just their appearance. It was the way Liam had always been around, how comfortable he was in their home, how he interacted with the kids. Matthew couldn't stop himself. He grabbed an old family photo album from the shelf and started flipping through it. There was a photo from Emma's 5th birthday party. Liam was in the background, holding Jacob on his shoulders while Evelyn laughed beside them. Matthew wasn't even in the picture. He remembered that day. He'd been stuck at work, and Liam had offered to step in and help. Page after page, the pattern repeated. Liam was always there, always close to Evelyn and the kids, almost like, "No," Matthew muttered under his breath, slamming the album shut. His heart raced as doubts began to spiral into something darker. That night, Matthew lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Evelyn was asleep beside him, her breathing steady. He turned his head to look at her, studying her face. "Hey," he said quietly, nudging her shoulder. She stirred, opening her eyes groggily. "What is it?" "I was thinking," he began, keeping his voice casual, "about doing one of those ancestry DNA tests. It might be fun, right? See where Emma and Jacob's roots are." Evelyn blinked, sitting up slightly. "Why? You've never cared about that kind of stuff before?" "I don't know," Matthew said, shrugging. "Just thought it'd be interesting. Everyone's doing it these days." Evelyn hesitated, her eyes searching his face. "If you want to, sure. But what's the point? We already know we're not exactly exotic." She smiled, trying to lighten the mood. Matthew forced a laugh. "Yeah, but the kids might have something cool hidden in their genes. You never know." She shrugged, lying back down. "Okay, whatever makes you happy. Just don't rope me into it." As she drifted back to sleep, Matthew stared at the ceiling, his mind churning. A week later, Matthew sent off the DNA kits, telling Evelyn it was just a fun family project. He felt a pang of guilt as he handed the swabs to the kids, but his curiosity outweighed his hesitation. "Spit into the tube, Jacob," he instructed. "Why are we doing this again?" Emma asked, wrinkling her nose. "Just for fun," Matthew said, forcing a smile. "Maybe you'll find out you're related to someone famous." Jacob grinned. "Like Spider-Man?" "Sure," Matthew replied, ruffling his son's hair. Evelyn watched from the doorway, arms crossed. "You're really serious about this, huh?" "Why not?" Matthew said casually. She shook her head with a small laugh. "You're such a nerd sometimes." The results arrived 3 weeks later. Matthew opened the email with trembling hands, his heart pounding in his chest. His eyes scanned the report, and his stomach dropped. Emma and Jacob both had significant Spanish ancestry. Matthew froze, staring at the screen. Spanish? Neither he nor Evelyn had Spanish roots. But Liam did. He reread the results, hoping he'd made a mistake, but the evidence was clear. His mind flashed back to Liam's dark features, his easy charm, the countless times he'd been around the kids. The pieces clicked into place. Matthew sat in the car outside his office, gripping the steering wheel. His hands trembled as anger, betrayal, and heartbreak churned in his chest. 17 years. 17 years of lies. The woman he loved, the mother of his children, had been unfaithful. And with his own stepbrother. And Margaret, his own mother, had known. Her words from weeks ago echoed in his mind. "You've done a great job covering it up, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." Matthew slammed his fist against the dashboard, letting out a guttural yell. The betrayal was too much to process. After a few minutes, he forced himself to calm down. This wasn't the time to break down. He needed to think, to plan. He picked up his phone and opened the photos of Emma and Jacob again. For years, he believed they were his. He'd raised them, loved them unconditionally. And now, this truth threatened to rip everything apart. But was he sure? Was there any chance he was wrong? Matthew clenched his jaw. He'd need more proof. And when he had it, he'd make sure Evelyn and Liam regretted every moment of their betrayal. For now, he would wait. Matthew's knuckles were white as he gripped the edge of the kitchen table, the DNA test results laid out in front of him like a ticking bomb. He heard Evelyn moving around upstairs, getting ready for bed, oblivious to the storm brewing below. "Evelyn," he called, his voice steady but icy. "Come down here. We need to talk." Evelyn appeared at the top of the stairs, concern etched on her face. "Matt, what is it?" "It's late. Just come down," he repeated, not looking up. When she finally sat across from him, he slid the results across the table. "Explain this?" Evelyn picked up the papers, her eyes scanning the text. Her face went pale, the color draining away as the truth hit her. "Matt, are Emma and Jacob really my children?" His voice was cold, demanding, leaving no room for evasion. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "What are you talking about, Matt?" "Of course, they're yours." "I know," he snapped, slamming his hand on the table, making her jump. "I know they're not mine. The DNA test proves it." The tears spilled over as she looked up at him, her voice trembling. "Matt, please, it's not what you think." "Then what is it?" he shouted, his anger finally boiling over. "Was it Liam? How long has this been going on?" Evelyn's sobs grew louder. "It was a mistake, at first. It just happened. But then, for 17 years? Matthew roared, his fists clenching until his knuckles turned white. "You lied to me for 17 years? The sound of his voice drew Margaret into the room. She looked between her son and daughter-in-law, alarmed by the shouting. "What's going on?" "You knew," Matthew said coldly, turning his gaze on his mother. "You knew all along, didn't you? You helped her lie to me." Margaret's face fell. "Matt, save it," he interrupted. "You're just as guilty as she is." Evelyn reached out, trying to touch his arm, but he jerked away. "Matt, please. I never wanted to hurt you." "Well, you did," he snapped, standing up so abruptly that the chair toppled over. "You both did." Margaret took a step forward. "We were trying to protect you, Matt." "Protect me?" He laughed bitterly. "By lying to me? By letting me believe those kids were mine?" Evelyn's sobs turned to wails, her body shaking with the force of her grief. I'm so sorry, Matt. I love you. It just got out of hand. Matthew stared at her, feeling a strange sense of detachment. Out of hand? That's what you call this? You've ruined everything. Evelyn crumbled, falling to her knees. Please, Matt. We can work through this. We can go to therapy. We can fix it. Fix it? He echoed, his voice hollow. How do you fix 17 years of lies? Margaret tried to interject. Matt, please. Think about Emma and Jacob. They love you. They need you. They're not mine, he said, his voice breaking for the first time. They're not my children. They are in every way that matters, Margaret insisted, tears streaming down her face now too. You've raised them, loved them. That doesn't change. Matthew's shoulders sagged, the weight of the betrayal crashing down on him. But it does change, he whispered. Everything changes. He turned away from them, feeling suffocated by their presence. I need some time. I can't look at either of you right now. Matt, please, Evelyn begged, reaching out to him once more. Don't go. We need to talk about this. We need to figure this out together. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of rage and sorrow. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Evelyn. Or you, Mom? With that, he walked out of the house, the door slamming shut behind him. He didn't know where he was going, only that he needed to get away. Away from the lies, the betrayal, the pain. As he drove aimlessly through the night, his mind raced with thoughts of Emma and Jacob. They were innocent in all of this, and the thought of losing them tore at his heart. But how could he continue living a lie? Matthew pulled over to the side of the road, his head falling into his hands. His whole life had been built on deceit. The woman he loved, the children he cherished, even his own mother, all of them had been part of a grand charade. His phone buzzed with messages from Evelyn and Margaret, but he ignored them. He needed space to think, to breathe. How could he move forward from this? How could he rebuild his life after such a profound betrayal? Hours passed as he sat there, the weight of his reality pressing down on him. The sun began to rise, casting a pale light over the horizon. With a deep sigh, he started the car and drove back home, his mind made up. He couldn't undo the past, but he could decide how to handle the future. Emma and Jacob were his children in every way that mattered, and he wouldn't abandon them. But Evelyn and Margaret, they would have to face the consequences of their actions. When he walked back into the house, the tension was palpable. Evelyn and Margaret were waiting, their eyes red from crying. Matt, Evelyn started, her voice hoarse. Please, can we talk? He held up a hand, stopping her. I've made a decision. I'll be here for Emma and Jacob. They're innocent in all of this. But as for you two, I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Margaret stepped forward. Matt, please. We made mistakes, but we love you. We were trying to protect you. Protect me? He repeated, shaking his head. You destroyed me. Evelyn's sobs started anew. What can I do to make this right? Matthew looked at her, his expression hardening. I don't know if you can, but you'll have to live with the consequences of your actions. He turned and walked upstairs, leaving them both to contemplate the wreckage of their lives. As he entered Emma and Jacob's room, he watched them sleep, his heart aching. They were his children, no matter what the DNA said, and he would be there for them, no matter what. But as for Evelyn and Margaret, the path to forgiveness was long and uncertain, and Matthew didn't know if he had it in him to walk it. Matthew sat in the dark, staring at the dim glow of his laptop screen. Sleep had been a distant memory for weeks. The betrayal that had gutted him now fueled his resolve. He wasn't going to let Evelyn, Liam, or even Margaret walk away from this unscathed. If they wanted to shatter his life, he'd make sure theirs burned to the ground. The next morning his plan began. Matthew quietly spent hours researching how to secure his financial independence without alerting Evelyn. The family had a joint account, but Matthew had kept a separate emergency fund, a fact Evelyn had never cared to ask about. He began transferring funds from the joint account into this separate account in small, unnoticeable increments. Morning, babe, Evelyn greeted one day as she walked into the kitchen, her robe loosely tied. She kissed him on the cheek, the picture of a loving wife. He forced a smile, closing the banking app on his phone. Morning. Coffee's ready. Evelyn grabbed a mug and sat across from him. You seem a little off lately. Is everything okay? Matthew hid the flash of anger that surged through him. Everything okay? After 17 years of lies? He took a sip of his coffee and smiled faintly. Just work stress. Nothing to worry about. Oh, she said softly, then reached across the table to touch his hand. You know I'm here for you, right? He stared at her hand on his, resisting the urge to pull away. Of course, he said, his voice even. I know. Over the next few weeks, Matthew hired a private investigator. If he was going to expose them, he needed every shred of evidence. The PI was efficient, returning with folders filled with damning information. Late one night, Matthew sat alone in his office, poring over everything. The affair had started shortly after Emma's birth, continuing sporadically for years. There were text messages between Evelyn and Liam, some as recent as last month, and photos of them meeting in a hotel. But the most damning evidence was a secret account in Evelyn's name. It held over $50,000, money Matthew had never known about. His mother wasn't innocent either. Margaret had been funneling money from the family business for years. She had known about the affair and had covered for Evelyn multiple times when Matthew might have caught on. Matthew closed the folders, his jaw clenched. He had all he needed. Matthew waited for the right moment. He invited the entire family to dinner at their house: Margaret, Liam, Evelyn, the kids, and even a few cousins and close friends. Evelyn seemed surprised at his sudden enthusiasm for hosting. This is so nice, Evelyn said as she set the table. We haven't had everyone together in ages. It felt like the right time, Matthew replied, his tone neutral. As the family arrived, laughter and conversation filled the room. Matthew played the gracious host, pouring drinks and engaging in small talk, all while his mind raced with what was about to unfold. Halfway through dinner, Matthew stood, raising his glass. I want to say something, he began, the room quieting as all eyes turned to him. I've always prided myself on being a man who values family above all else. Loyalty, trust, honesty, these are the things that bind us together. Or at least they're supposed to. His gaze lingered on Evelyn and Liam, who shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Margaret frowned. Matt, what's this about? Oh, you'll see. Matthew walked to the corner of the room where he'd set up a small speaker. He connected his phone and pressed play. The room was filled with the sound of Evelyn's voice, soft and breathless. I can't stop thinking about you, Liam. Last night was incredible. There were gasps around the table. Liam's face went pale, while Evelyn's eyes filled with horror. What is this? Margaret demanded, her voice shaking. Matthew's smile was cold. Oh, we're just getting started. He clicked to the next recording, this one of Liam's voice. He'll never know. He's too stupid to figure it out. Evelyn burst into tears, covering her face with her hands. Matt, please stop. Matthew ignored her, pulling out the folder of evidence and tossing it onto the table. In case anyone doubts the authenticity, here's everything: texts, photos, bank statements. 17 years of lies and betrayal, laid out for everyone to see. The room erupted into chaos. You're a monster, Margaret shouted at Matthew, trying to grab the folder, but he snatched it away. No, Mom, he said sharply. You don't get to play the victim here. You knew. You helped her. Matt, I was trying to protect you. Margaret pleaded. Protect me? He laughed bitterly. By covering for her? By lying to me? Evelyn fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. I'm so sorry, Matt. Please, I'll do anything to make it right. Don't do this in front of everyone. Why not? He asked coldly. You weren't worried about them when you were sneaking around with Liam. Liam, who had been sitting silently, finally stood. All right, enough, he said, his voice trembling. You've made your point, Matt. Matthew turned to him, his voice dripping with venom. Oh, we're just getting started, brother. Or should I say, father, since it turns out Emma and Jacob are yours. A collective gasp went through the room. Liam opened his mouth to speak, but couldn't find the words. You disgust me, Matthew said, his voice low and dangerous. Both of you. The next day, Matthew took the evidence of Margaret's financial misconduct to the family business's board of directors. He made his case, presenting undeniable proof that she had been siphoning funds for years. Margaret was removed from her position immediately. Her reputation was in tatters, and she was left with nothing. When she confronted him at his home, her face red with anger, Matthew didn't flinch. "You think you've won, don't you?" she spat. "I didn't win," he said calmly. "But I made sure you lost." Matthew packed his belongings quietly over the course of a week. He didn't tell Evelyn or the kids. On the day he left, he drained the joint accounts entirely, leaving just enough for the mortgage payment. Evelyn found him in the kitchen as he was about to walk out the door. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice panicked. "I'm done," he said simply, slinging the bag over his shoulder. "I've given you everything for 17 years. Now it's my turn to take something back." "Matt, please," she begged, grabbing his arm. "Don't leave. We can fix this. I'll do anything." He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You already did enough." With that, he walked out the door, leaving Evelyn sobbing on the floor. Matthew didn't leave a forwarding address or any way to contact him. For the first time in years, he felt free. Evelyn, Liam, and Margaret were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives, while Matthew disappeared into the distance, determined to rebuild his own. The gentle hum of the coffee shop surrounded Matthew as he sat by the window, staring out at the bustling city street. The life he had built here, far from the chaos and betrayal of his past, was peaceful. He took a sip of his coffee and glanced at the woman across from him. Charlotte smiled at him, her hazel eyes sparkling with warmth. "You've been quiet today. Everything okay?" Matthew set his mug down and smiled back. "Just thinking about how lucky I am." Charlotte tilted her head, studying him. "You don't talk much about your past," she said softly, her voice inviting but not prying. "That's because it's not worth revisiting," Matthew replied. He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "What matters is right here, right now." She nodded, squeezing his hand. "Well, for what it's worth, I'm glad you're here. You make everything better." Matthew felt a pang in his chest, not of pain, but gratitude. After years of turmoil, he had found someone who gave him peace. Someone who didn't hide lies behind a smile. Hundreds of miles away, Evelyn sat in a cramped, dimly lit apartment, the sound of a leaking faucet echoing in the silence. The woman who once lived in a spacious home filled with laughter and luxury now faced a far bleaker reality. She rummaged through a stack of overdue bills, her hands trembling. Every time she thought she had hit rock bottom, life seemed to find a way to push her lower. Her phone buzzed, and she grabbed it with desperate hope. It was a text from Liam. "Liam, need $20. Can't make rent." Evelyn stared at the screen, bitterness rising in her chest. Liam, the man she had destroyed her life for, had become nothing more than a leech. Their affair had crumbled within months after Matthew's departure. Without the secrecy, the thrill was gone, leaving only regret and resentment. She tossed the phone aside, burying her face in her hands. Memories of Matthew flooded her mind, his kindness, his unwavering support, the way he had loved her unconditionally. "I'm so sorry," she whispered to no one, tears streaking her face. Margaret paced her small apartment, the walls closing in on her. Once the proud matriarch of the family, she now lived in obscurity, her name synonymous with disgrace. She picked up the phone and dialed Evelyn's number. "What do you want, Mom?" Evelyn's voice was weary. Margaret hesitated. "I wanted to see if you've heard from Matt." Evelyn scoffed bitterly. "Why would he talk to us after what we did? He's probably living his best life while we rot." Margaret's throat tightened. She had justified her actions for so long, convincing herself that she had been protecting Matthew. But deep down, she knew the truth. Her pride and greed had blinded her, and she had lost the son who once adored her. "I think we should try to make things right," Margaret said quietly. Evelyn laughed, the sound harsh and bitter. "Right? How do you make right 17 years of betrayal?" Margaret didn't answer. The house was warm and inviting, filled with the scent of freshly baked cookies. Matthew stood in the kitchen, watching Charlotte move with practiced ease as she placed the cookies on a cooling rack. "I think you just invented the best cookie ever," Matthew said, grinning. Charlotte laughed, brushing flour off her hands. "You always say that." "Well, I mean it every time. He leaned against the counter, marveling at how natural and effortless life felt with her. Charlotte's phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen. Oh, it's the mail reminder. Did you check the box today? Matthew nodded. Yeah, I brought it in earlier. He retrieved the small stack of letters from the counter, flipping through them absent-mindedly. Most were junk mail, but one envelope caught his eye. It was handwritten, addressed to him. The sender, Evelyn. His expression hardened as he opened it. Charlotte noticed his change in demeanor and stepped closer. Something wrong? She asked. Matthew scanned the letter. Matt, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm writing this because I have nothing left. I made a terrible mistake, and I've paid for it every day since you left. Please, I'm begging you to give me another chance. I'll do anything to make things right. I miss you. I miss the life we had. Evelyn, he folded the letter slowly, his face unreadable. Is it important? Charlotte asked gently. Matthew glanced at her, then at the letter. Without a word, he walked to the fireplace, tossing the letter into the flames. The paper curled and blackened, turning to ash. Charlotte touched his arm. Are you okay? Matthew turned to her, his expression softening. Better than ever, he said, pulling her into his arms. Liam stood in the parking lot of a rundown motel, his hands shoved into his pockets. He had spent the last 5 years drifting from one dead-end job to another. After Matthew's departure, his reputation had taken a nosedive. Family and friends had ostracized him, and even Evelyn had abandoned him when things got tough. He thought about Matthew often, not with anger, but with guilt. For years, he had envied his stepbrother, coveting the life Matthew had built. Now, Liam was left with nothing but the hollow shell of his own greed. Hey, buddy, you paying for the room or not? The motel manager called from the doorway. Liam sighed, fishing a crumpled $20 bill from his pocket. Yeah, I'll pay. As the door slammed shut, Liam leaned against the wall, staring up at the night sky. He wondered if Matthew ever thought of him. Months later, Matthew and Charlotte walked along the beach, the golden sand warm beneath their feet. Have you ever thought about moving closer to the water? Charlotte asked, her hand in his. Matthew smiled, gazing at the horizon. Maybe. It's peaceful here. Charlotte nudged him playfully. You'd miss the city too much. Maybe, he admitted. They walked in comfortable silence for a while before Charlotte spoke again. Whatever happened to the people from your past? Do you think about them? Matthew considered her question carefully. I think about them sometimes, he said finally, but not with anger. They're just part of a life I've left behind. Charlotte nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. Matthew looked down at her, feeling a sense of contentment he hadn't known was possible. The betrayal and pain that had once consumed him were now distant memories. He had learned to let go, to rebuild, and to trust again. Let's go home, he said, pulling her closer. As they walked back toward their house, Matthew felt lighter, freer. The shadows of his past no longer haunted him, and for the first time in years, he truly believed in the possibility of happiness.